I want to live a life of a free imagination. I want to work with people in around this continent to make new exciting things, to make sci-fi things, and to make stories, and to make pictures. I want this generation of young parents to have their kids see Africans writing their own stories, painting their own stories. That simple act, I think that's the most political act that one can have. I want to see a continent where every kind of person's imagination is not does not have to look for being allowed. Me, I'm an African and I'm a Pan Africanist. I want to see this continent change.
We good? Good evening, everyone. This short address is called We Must Free Our Imaginations. This is a very special weekend. Long before it was chosen to pay tribute to Binyavanga, it was a weekend reserved for dreamers, for bringing unimaginable good into reality. Yesterday would have been the 88th birthday of Winnie Madikizela Mandela, one of the architects of the destruction of apartheid. Yesterday was also the United Nations International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Yesterday was also the first day of the rest of my life. Like my father, Binyavanga was a revolutionary. Like Binyavanga, my father died in his 5th decade, far before his time, long before his best work was to be done. Like Binyavanga, my father was born in East Africa, in the neighboring Uganda, which is so present in much of Binyavanga's brilliant memoir, One Day I Will Write About This Place. My father fled his country from Idi Amin, a man who was too often mocked by those who should have been busy trying to stop him, a man who ended up feeding his enemies to crocodiles. My father was killed at the age of 40 years and 347 days, and I have been counting down to yesterday for most of my adult life. If anyone understood the importance of imagination, it was Binyavanga. He had the guts to be openly and happily homosexual in his home country, and to be openly and happily queer for many of us is to escape the gravitational pull of centuries of oppression. Many of us have had to tear ourselves free from friends, from family, and most of all, from ourselves. To accept oneself as homosexual is often an act of spiritual resilience which, above all, requires imagination. To be openly queer, to be proudly queer, is the bravery to dream of a better world, even as every voice in your life and every cell in your own body tells you to resist who you are, tells you that you should not exist. Beyond the magnificence of his prose, which skipped off the page like free jazz, Binyavanga had that bravery. If anyone understood the importance of imagination, it was my father, Lieutenant Colonel Wilson Okwonga. He was killed in an attempt to resist the insurgency of Uganda's current president, Yoweri Museveni. My father was killed in that conflict because he was able to imagine a world where, if he lost that conflict, hundreds of thousands of people from his region would be slaughtered in revenge. Tragically, my father was right. If anyone is just beginning to understand the importance of imagination, it is me. On Friday, last Friday, my life as I knew it came to an end. That is when I reached the age of 40 years and 347 days, the same age as my father. No man from my bloodline has ever made it this far in over 80 years. I never had the guts to imagine what would come after this moment. I was too busy trying to get here. And now I am standing at the edge of a 10,000-foot cliff, ready to skydive down through the clouds, utterly free. This weekend, my new life began. It is mine now, and so are all of the dreams that come with it. Those dreams are now my responsibility, and I will guard them as fiercely as I guard anything in this world. We must imagine, every single one of us in this audience. We must be vigilant enough to imagine the threat of what is coming, because it is coming. We must not be like those public figures in Uganda who scoffed and giggled as they dismissed the rising threat of Idi Amin. We must not be like those public figures in America who laughed when it was suggested that Donald Trump was a threat to American democracy. We must not be like those public figures in the United Kingdom who, even now, still sneer when it is suggested that the current British government is acting entirely in its own interests. We must not be guilty of a failure of imagination. We must understand the full extent of what it is that these people intend to do. Like Binyavanga, we must free our imaginations, not because it is fun, although it is fun, but because our very futures depend upon it. Yet, we must be especially brave in our dreams, because it is far harder to envisage love than it is to envisage horror. Against the frightening backdrop of our current social, political, and ecological moment, we must still somehow find a vision of joy. It is vital to resist. It is yet more vital to insist upon a better future for all of us. Last night, I was reading the Twitter feed of Mariam Kaba, the African-American prison abolitionist, as she shared her thoughts on the upcoming American election. These two political parties act as constraints on so much of people's imaginations, she wrote. That's the thing I just hate the most. Your desires for something better are being shrunken every single minute. I feel continuously sad and furious about the deliberate suffocation of people's aspirations, continued Kaba. People who constantly scream about realism and try to foreclose even thinking about something else, something different from the current order. This suffocation is spirit murder. I suggest that we should not only vote for those people who uphold the basic principles of democracy. In our daily lives, just as Binyavanga did, we must demand the unimaginable. In The Black Jacobins, his exceptional history of the Haitian Revolution, C.L.R. James wrote that slavery seemed eternal. But thanks to the vision of countless enslaved people and their friends, slavery was ended. There must have been a time when apartheid seemed eternal. But then, one day, the concept of apartheid was introduced to Winnie Mandela, and she would not take no for an answer. We are now at a point in human history where our civilization faces the twin threats of fascism and ecological collapse, where one by one, it can seem as if the lights of global resistance are quietly being snuffed out. It is at such a time that I turn to the words of Benjamin Ferencz. Ferencz, at the age of 27, became a lead prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, overseeing the trial of men responsible for the murders of over 1 million Jewish people. 1 million human beings. Ferencz, who is himself Jewish, is the last surviving prosecutor of those trials, and he is now 100 years old. In a recent interview, he spoke of the importance of a free imagination. People get discouraged, he said. They should remember, from me, it takes courage not to be discouraged. When he was reminded that genocides are still happening, even as we speak, he nodded. And he also pointed out that, thanks to all those dreamers out there, dreamers like you and like me, there have been vast advances in his own lifetime for women, for queer people. We're on a roll, he said, interrupting his interviewer. We're marching forwards. And so somehow, we must march forwards. We must be able to imagine the most thrilling of futures, to imagine love, to imagine peace, to imagine happiness. Binyavanga wrote in his memoir that, working in a creative field, I have to use all the resources I have. And I think that is what we must do, continue to do, or begin to do for the rest of our lives. Because today is the first weekend of the rest of my life, and it is the first weekend of the rest of yours. In order to pay tribute to Binyavanga, let's get to work. Thank you.
Let's go back to what we call stupidity. See, now there was that thing called Darwin, called Charles Darwin. Somebody said there's a thing called evolution. And then all the books that those white people were writing, just after Darwin checked his scheme, was like, when we go to Africa, evolution, it happens like this. There are apes, then there are apes and Africans, and there's a white one standing like this. So, that person who fungured the first churches, that's how they thought. Here. And we built our institutions, our best schools, our top schools, Alliance, Parker, government colleges. That sensibility filters into something. So, for example, you go on Facebook when you're talking about homosexuality and you find somebody with 3 degrees who went to a good school saying Africans are natural. And that is why homosexuality is bad. Africans are just natural, which means Africans are close to nature, which is coming from these Africans are near apes. So now you don't see whose job you're doing for free. Yeah. Because me, I never seen no natural human homo sapiens. All are people who make what they are, who control their fate, who imagine their fate. There's no such thing of Africans are natural. Well, dogs are natural, grass is natural, those are natural. Africans are not natural. What the hell is this thing, you know? It is such a deep embedded self-hate. And I was brought up to hate myself like that. To look outside the window and see people making loud noises at night and being like, "Hey, those Africans, hey. Sisi to receive civilization." And because I've received civilization, if I work hard, I'll go and I'll get a scholarship. And when I get a scholarship, I shall come back and then attend Bible study. Because hapo hiyo sitaki hiyo. Hiyo itaangusha. Easily. It is a mixture of demons. It's a demon. So now you have said what? Pentecost inakwambia ati everyone ever existed in Africa until Mzungu came here is in hell, burning. Unnatural burning.